We've got a charged atmosphere for two rivals in the East Division. It's the Moonshine Throwdown, Marshall and Western Kentucky.
It's intercepted by Key, and Key has one man to beat. A nice cut move. Edwards can't get him. Key takes it all the way. A pick six for Devin Key.
There goes Key. Splits the defenders and he's gone. 65 yards, he completes it with a somersault.
So please join me in welcoming the 21st head coach of WKU football history, Tyson Helton.
And Marshall is going to finish the year 9-4 and champions of the 2018 Gasparilla Bowl, the sixth consecutive bowl win for the Marshall Thundering Herd.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. It is the final week of position group breakdowns. This week we are talking about the quarterbacks. And we're going to touch a little bit on the coaching staffs to familiarize you guys with what coaches are on the staffs and who they're coaching and yada, yada, yada. But I'm sure everybody's tuning in to listen about these quarterbacks. So we got the whole gang this week. Trace is here. Moff's here. I mean, this is a real deal stuff. We're going to have some good insight, some good analysis. Find us on Twitter at Moonshine TD, the podcast at MSTD_podcast. And of course, find the show every single place you can pretty much download a podcast. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode. They will be automatically downloaded to your phone. So no excuse to miss an episode as we really, really now get ready for the opening of the 2019 season. To start off, fellas, we're going to start off in Bowling Green, Kentucky this week. Why not? And we're going to talk quarterbacks. Phil still ranks this unit tied for sixth with Marshall and UAB. Maybe surprising to some fans, maybe not. We're going to talk about projected starters, which, you know, we really don't know who the starter is going to be for Western right now, so we're going to talk about the top two that we think are the front runners to be QB1, and then we'll mention everybody else that's on the roster so you can familiarize yourself with every quarterback that's on the roster. So, Steve, before we talk about those projected starters, let's talk a little bit about 2018 and how that season went and how it ended. It was very, very roller coaster in the 2018 season. With, three quarterbacks playing, nobody really starting, a big long string of games. I mean, it was – I don't know what the thought process was. It didn't even seem at times it was like going with the hot hand. It was just like, let's throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks. So let's revisit that no matter how much you may not want to so we can get some context about 2019. So let's talk quarterbacks, man.
Yeah, last year – it was just a revolving door. It was inexperience all the way around. I mean, it was senior Drew Eccles that got the keys to start the year. He got injured. And then we just kind of flip-flopped between Davis Shanley and Stephen Duncan. Shanley got injured. Duncan played quite a bit. Then Duncan got injured. Shanley came back. And then Eccles came back, got injured. And then Duncan kind of finished the season off. And those three, nobody really ever got in a groove. Duncan and Shanley were pretty close in the amount of reps they got. I think Shanley ended up having a few more snaps than he did, but Duncan had the majority of the successful stats and kind of led us to our victories. That we, pretty much every victory we had was on Duncan's shoulders. So, instability there, and hopefully we clear that up this year and have a little bit more clarity kind of heading into week one is what Helton's kind of painting that we should know kind of heading into that game week. They're going to know who's going to have the keys and who's going to be QB1 for, game prep week.
Yeah. So in context, to start 2018, there were no quarterbacks with any career starts. So you really were starting behind the eight ball, so to speak, at the position. So now, you go from no career starts in 2018 to now 18 career starts between all the quarterbacks that are on the roster now. Stephen Duncan and Davis Shanley both return, which were the top 2 leading passers from 2018. Toppers also bring in graduate transfer Ty Story, who we'll talk about here in a minute. And then there are a couple other quarterbacks that we'll mention. But the 2 we think are the front runners for QB1, and we're going to start with Stephen Duncan because he was on the roster last year, had the most success. He was the leading passer, the 6'4", 230-pound junior, 108 out of 187 on the season, 58% completion percentage, 1,071 yards, 9 touchdowns, 7 picks. I mean, he played in a lot of games, but he started 5. So could he ultimately be the one that ends up being QB1? Perhaps. And then the other one that we think may be going toe-to-toe with Mr. Duncan is that graduate transfer from Arkansas, Ty Story, the 6'2", 215-pound senior. Now, last year at Arkansas, 143 out of 250, 57% completion percentage, 1,584 yards, 11 TDs, 10 interceptions. So just about these 2 guys, Steve. We'll talk about everybody else in a minute. I mean, let's get some feelings about, these 2 dudes in particular as we talk about maybe who's going to be QB1 week 1.
It's hard to say. I mean, the guy I stumped for all last year was Duncan. I mean, he kind of has that prototypical, the height, the weight, the build. He's a big guy, big arm. That's kind of been his reputation since he's been on campus. He's kind of paid his dues, sat in line. And when he got on the field, he had some successful moments. He had some inconsistent moments. But that kind of goes along with first true playing experience, first game starting, and then not knowing if he was going to be out there from game to game. It was just nobody ever was given the keys and said, hey, this is yours until, you prove you can't do it. So that's the guy that I hope and I feel like will get the first opportunity. He was actually recruited by Coach Helton out of high school, so Helton is familiar with him as a prospect, and I think he's going to get that first opportunity. That being said, senior graduate transfer coming from an SEC school with some pretty good game experience. Not no stats that are going to blow you away. Arkansas's not a football school by any means. So, but he's still an SEC caliber player, athlete. Haven't watched a lot of tape on him, but it's hard to imagine that he would jump over to our program without some premise of game time or opportunity. So, really it may be a coin flip. I know we had our first scrimmage today, and Coach Helton was very critical of the play of our quarterbacks. I don't believe he named names. We just said 2 quarterbacks, and, like we said, we believe it's these 2 guys. So, nobody has taken the lead in that race for QB1 without knowing much about Story, haven't, watched any film on him, have just read his stat lines. And then knowing what Duncan brought to the table last year and hoping that he's grown and developed more with that game experience. So, either of those guys I will be comfortable with getting the first start against Central Arkansas. But, really it's up for either one of those guys at this point.
Yeah, we all season long last year, we all basically collectively thought that Stephen Duncan should have been the one to run the show because it seemed like he gave the Tops the best opportunity to win week in and week out or whenever he was on the field. And you're right. When you have a first-year quarterback, you're going to have those growing pains, and you got to take the bad with the good and just hope you have more good than bad. But along with that, when you bring in a graduate transfer that's a senior, you got to think he's coming there to play. He's definitely not going somewhere to sit. So even though nobody has separated themselves out to be completely QB1, there has been a definite separation apparently between 2 guys. So instead of being a 3 or 4 or 5 horse race, it's now a 2 horse race. So we'll see how it goes between here and week 1, and we may not know up until they announce it. Maybe even game day at Central Arkansas. Who knows? So let's talk about the other guys that are on the roster. I mean, of course, Davis Shanley still there, played a lot last year in 2018 was the second leading passer on the team, the 6'1", 190-pound sophomore, 96 out of 141, threw for 942 yards, 68% completion percentage, something you like to see. But just 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions on the season. Did get dinged up a little bit, missed a little bit of time, but still, he's there. And, we've been saying all along, not to single out Davis at all, but somebody's going to be the odd man out, and that's never a good thing because all these guys want to play, but you can only play one at a time. Then you got the big 4-star recruit, Kavaris Thomas, from just up the road from where I live in Lakeland, Florida, the 6'4", 250-pound redshirt freshman. I mean, that is a load at quarterback. Just attempted 1 pass last year, 0 out of 1, but whatever. And then the other one the other quarterback on the roster, Sean McCormick, we mentioned before, the 6'5", 225-pound redshirt junior transfer from Louisville. Marginal stats last year, Louisville 4 of 13, 29 yards, no touchdowns, and 1 interception. So how about these other 3 quarterbacks currently on the top of roster? I mean, where do you go? What do you make of these 3 guys, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, Davis Shanley, got some game rep last year. Actually kind of surprised me with some of his production. The way he played at Louisville was pretty good. Never was really blown away with his arm strength or arm talent in any way. But he's definitely kind of an elusive runner, pretty good athlete. I didn't expect that, but, he also is kind of a smaller guy to be running and taking those hits, and that was kind of brought to light when he suffered some injuries, missed some game time. So unless he's bulked up this offseason, I just don't see him getting a lot of playing time. I've kind of felt since the end of last year that this quarterback room was going to be heavy coming into this year before we added a couple transfers. And I'm really just going to be surprised to see if everyone sticks around to August 29th. There's one guy has transferred out that was on the roster last year. But, nobody of any, quote unquote value, somebody that might have been battling for game time. So, Davis is a good quarterback. He certainly, if he gets thrust into the position and has to play for some unknown reason, not the other 2 guys, he's certainly capable. And then you got Kavaris Thomas, just a heralded recruit out of high school. I believe he was the number 22 dual threat quarterback in the nation when we landed him. Our first ever 4-star signee out of high school. And, he got to see a little bit of time last year. He used that 4-game exception to the redshirt rule to the max. He appeared in 4 games last year. And, a lot of people were stumping to see him more. Big kid. You listed his size. He's a big guy. He's big enough to, play a tight end position or a lineman or a linebacker. You could put him anywhere on the field with that kind of athletic ability. But he also is known to have a big arm. He can run. And, people really want to see him, and it's kind of hard to be patient and tuck that talent, perceived talent on the bench, on the shelf and wait for him to wait his turn. But, I'd rather put some experience out there than burn, some game time on somebody that you really have no idea what he's going to do. Put somebody out there that's got some game experience, especially for a first-year coach, trying to implement his system. I do want to see the guy. I just don't think it's going to happen this year, unless it's just strictly an emergency or just a situational call, at this point.
Well, look, you got a guy with the athleticism of Kavaris Thomas. You're right. You got to try to get him on the field wherever you can, and whether that's a position change or you have a special package of plays, or maybe it's a wildcat type scenario, or whatever you got to do. But I mean, Marshall's in a similar situation. They brought in a kid a couple of years ago that Herd fans are quite familiar with by the name of Xavier Gaines, who was a highly rated dual threat quarterback. And now he plays tight end, and Trace is picking him to have a breakout season this year at that position. I mean, sometimes it's not worth it to sit on the bench and just wait, because that's a lot of talent just to sit there. So if he gets to play quarterback, great. But you got to get him on the field. Whatever that means, you got to get him on the field. So hopefully, Topper fans will get treated to a little bit more of Kavaris Thomas in 2019, because 6'4", 250 pounds with the athleticism that the man possesses, it's hard to keep that on the sideline. I mean, point blank. All right. So you mentioned that, you'd be surprised if everybody makes it to August 29th. And I'm kind of right there with you. I mean, Shanley, if it happens to be Shanley, he's a redshirt sophomore already, so you don't have the luxury of appearing in the 4 games and then using that as a redshirt year. You kind of have a hard line you have to draw. Kavaris Thomas has already used his redshirt year. McCormick is a redshirt junior. Story's a graduate transfer senior. So there's really nobody that. I mean, is Duncan already used his redshirt year as well? What is it? Yeah, he's a redshirt junior. So nobody has the luxury of taking advantage of the 4-game window with this new redshirt rule. So we'll see how that plays out. So taking all that into account, let's cover these questions now. Who's the toughest to replace? I mean, you got your 2 top leading passers back, and the only departure that I could find other than who transferred out earlier is Drew Eccles. So. I mean, by default, is Drew Eccles the toughest to replace?
Yeah, I mean, whether he didn't play a lot, but he was still, a senior voice in the room that, got to learn and play behind, Brandon Dowdy and Mike White. So, whether he was, physically and just as gifted and talented as the other guys on the roster, he still was a senior leader in that position room. So, you hate to lose seniors, and he kind of went out with, kind of an injury-plagued season. Kind of hate that for him. But he still got to live the life of, being a college footballer and appeared in some big games. So, he's by default, he is the toughest to replace. And, you're always going to miss senior leadership no matter who it is.
Yeah, that's a good point about it's not always about production, because Drew was there for a couple of conference championship runs or at least one, definitely at least one, and learned from, or was there when Helton was there as the OC, and kind of carried that over to this youth movement at quarterback that Topper fans have been dealing with, for the past season. So, that is a tough loss. I mean, no matter how you slice it. So who are you the most excited to see in 2019?
Yeah, I've got to stick with my my horse from last year. I want to see Mr. Duncan. I want to see him get, named the starter next week. After the second scrimmage, I want to see him be the guy, and I want to see him start multiple games in a row and have the opportunity to lead the team to more victories and hopefully a bowl appearance. So yeah, it's definitely Stephen Duncan for me.
Yeah, I think I'm there with you too. We clamored all season long to have Stephen Duncan have the reins for all of 2018, and it just didn't happen. So I kind of like to see him get a nice opportunity in 2019. So who's your breakout guy? I mean, is same?
Yeah, I'd love for it to possibly be Story if he had to play. I'd love him to be able to break out in his final season, but I'm really hoping Duncan is the hot hand, gets in and proves his worth. I think he surprised all of us last year with his ability to even run the ball. He could tuck the ball and run. And then he's got a big arm. Helton has said from day one he wants to bring that exciting stretch to field style, downfield shots back into the playbook, and not just dink and dunk your way down the field and end up punting the ball back. So I think Duncan is going to be that guy, and I think he's more than capable, and I think he's ready to do it.
Yeah, you keep going back to that strong arm, and there's no better example, really, that Marshall fans will be familiar with than on that final drive of last year's Moonshine Throwdown. You remember that final drive for the Toppers was deep in their own territory until he just uncorked a bomb that landed, and unfortunately for Topper fans, that drive didn't end the way you would like it to. But even to get into position to shove it into the end zone, a big, huge pass was completed to get down there. So the arm is definitely there. And the speed at wide receiver is there, which we covered last week. You got a offensive line now that has a more veteran presence. So all that lends itself to a more exciting brand of football that, Topper fans have been waiting for a couple of seasons. So I think it's all there. We'll just see if it all gets put together. So who's your potential MVP? I mean, it looks like from your previous two answers, we're going for the trifecta here. Who's your potential MVP for the quarterback unit in 2019?
Yeah, we're going trifecta. The 10 horse is going to be the MVP. I think Stephen Duncan's going to be the guy. I think he's going to lead us to bowl eligibility after a couple of disappointing seasons. And, hopefully just have a good year and be the guy we can count on and limit his mistakes, stay healthy, and, throw some big plays down the field.
Yeah, chuck it around the field. Okay. Time for the weekly hot take. And this is a big one. People will definitely want to hear the hot take for the quarterbacks in 2019. That is for sure.
Yeah. I think bowl eligibility, that's not a hot take. I mean, we've got to get to 6 win. That definitely should happen. But I think with the core that we have at wide receiver, which is just very sneaky and deep, we have some big targets, some experience returning. I am not going to be surprised to see Stephen Duncan finish in the top 3 in passing yards in Conference USA.
Man, that is definitely a pretty daggone hot take, considering some of the other quarterbacks that are in the conference. Mason Fine puts up yardage. People are expecting Morgan down at FIU to put up big numbers this year. Of course, you got Isaiah Green, who's looking to poise himself to have a breakout sophomore year. So that is a pretty hot take, considering, we keep talking about it. 5 starts last year for Stephen Duncan, only 1,071 yards. But those numbers, of course, the starts can't triple because you don't play 15 games in a year, but the yardage could definitely triple. You could easily see Stephen Duncan be a 3,400 yard passer, especially if you hearken back to those offensive numbers and things that were put up by Western Kentucky in 2014, 15, and 16, or 15 and 16 in particular. All right, man, I like that hot take. Stephen Duncan, every week. Stephen Duncan, if you're listening, Stephen Moffitt thinks you're going to be a top 3 passer in Conference USA. Don't let the man down. So hang with us. On the other side of this break, we're going to Huntington, West Virginia. I think Trace is over there, and we're going to talk about Marshall quarterbacks. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast.
Well, the last win over Marshall for the Cards was 30 years ago, and it'll be more than 30 before they get a chance to celebrate another victory. Doc Holliday's team with a much-needed win, and they have now beaten both teams that participated in the Beef O'Brady's Bowl last year, Southern Miss and U of L, as Marshall stuns Louisville here. The late touchdown, 17-13.
All right, welcome back. We're talking herd quarterbacks. Trace has joined the ranks of the crew here, and we're going to get right into it. Phil still ranks the herd unit, just like I said, leading in with the topper unit, tied for 6th with Western Kentucky and UAB. Also, like the Western Kentucky unit, the top 2 passers for the herd return in 2019. So we're going to talk about the guys. And unlike Western Kentucky, we definitely know who the bona fide number 1 starter is for Marshall. And we have a really, really good idea who's going to be QB2. Not much has changed from 2018 for the herd in this position. So Trace, talk to me about Isaiah Green. Talk to me about Alex Thompson. We'll get the measurables and the stats from 2018 in a minute. But, let's kind of recap what 2018 was like and then what your feelings are like towards 2019. And then we'll talk a little bit more in depth about those guys.
Yeah, I'll start off by saying I said during the running back episode that was the only preseason Phil Steele ranking that I didn't agree with. I don't agree with his tie for 6 for the quarterbacks for Marshall. Like, Western Kentucky doesn't even know who their quarterback is going to be right now. So how are you going to put them ahead of or tied with Isaiah Green. And then they got UAB's got very limited stats from last year. So I just don't see that. But like, it's not that outrageous, but I mean, I think Green will be a lot higher than that at season's end. But yeah, I mean, last year he made a really good first impression. I mean, he was 7-2 as a starter, I believe. His only 2 losses were to 2 bowl eligible or 2 teams and from the ACC that played in bowl games, both, good teams and everything. So I mean, I think that he's going to have a really good year this year. He had a good enough freshman year. Obviously getting co-freshman of the year, that was a big thing. But like at the same time, I mean, I expect a pretty good leap this year, kind of similar, which I'll hit on this more later, kind of similar to what Rakeem Cato did from his freshman year to his sophomore year. I'm not going to like predict that for sure, but like I could see it happening similar to that. And then as far as Alex Thompson goes, I mean, Doc said it in one of his pressers recently. He thinks that's a big thing for Marshall that Thompson's back, as the number 2 guy, because like he played a little bit last year and he was a pretty heralded guy coming in, and he didn't quite look like that, obviously, but like that's still a solid enough backup option there. You can trust him because he won a couple games last year. So I mean, I think they're in a good position quarterback wise, I think, and that's going to really pay off big time in the end for the Herd this year, I think, because as I'll mention later, the quarterback position, you can't put a price on how important it is, and you got to have that to be able to win a conference title and reach your ultimate goals. So I think Marshall's in good shape for that.
Yeah, I think you're right on about that Phil Steele ranking being tied for 6th. That is kind of way low, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, Mason Fine seems to be the darling of the conference at quarterback this year, but let's say he gets dinged up and goes down. Do we really know how well QB2 or 3 is at North Texas? I don't know anything about anybody else on their roster. The same thing with Morgan down there at FIU. Who is QB2 there? Are they as solid as the Herd is? I don't know, but they're definitely not 6th. So quarterback Isaiah Green, the 6'2", 212-pound sophomore, 187 out of 330 on the year last year, just 57% completion percentage, 2,459 yards on the year, 15 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Was named Conference USA co-freshman of the year. And then, of course, quarterback Alex Thompson, you mentioned, he comes over from Wagner last year, highly touted, called an NFL-type prospect, but he was a little rusty. He hadn't played in a year and a half due to injury, and even last year he was still trying to recover from injury, and that really reared its ugly head when he had to come in when Isaiah Green went down at the end of the Moonshine Throwdown, and of course, it just happened at the wrong time because Middle Tennessee comes to town, his first start, and he was just super rusty. Middle Tennessee escapes with the win and ultimately ended up being the tiebreaker that kept the Herd out of the Conference USA title game. But it is what it is. Alex Thompson, the 6'5", 236-pound senior, 53 out of 100 last year, 53% completion percentage, 506 yards, 5 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Now, by all accounts, both guys look really good in summer camp, but there is no quarterback controversy. This is Isaiah Green's team until something happens drastic. An injury, something. But by all accounts, Alex Thompson is now fully healthy and looks like the prospect that Herd fans were told he was last season. So that's good news. You got to like what they're going to bring this season. And if Herd fans are lucky enough to have Isaiah Green have that Rakeem Cato type breakout season from his freshman to sophomore year, the sky's really the limit for this Herd team. It really is. So let's talk about some other guys on the roster, Trace. Third string. Well, I don't know if he's third string, but a guy that's been getting a lot of reps in this summer camp is freshman quarterback Grant Wells, local kid from Charleston, West Virginia, 6'2", 204-pound freshman. Little nugget on Grant Wells. He also plays punter a little bit. And then you got Jackson White, the 6'2", 190-pound redshirt junior, has been serving as the Herd's holder on field goals and PATs. We'll see if that streak continues for Mr. White. Also on the roster, Luke Zaban of the, Marshall Thundering Herd Zabans. There have been a slew of them have played throughout the years for Marshall. The 6'2", 201-pound redshirt freshman. And then a newcomer this year, Maurice Underwood, before, signing day, he was committed like well over a year. The 6'3", 170-pound freshman. Interesting nugget on Mr. Underwood, comes from the very same high school that one Herd all-time great quarterback Rakeem Cato hails from, and even had Rakeem Cato serve as his quarterback coach for a season down there at Miami Central High School. So, Trace, what about the other 4 guys on the roster? How do you iron all this out?
Yeah, I mean, you made some good points there. I mean, Underwood, that's a pretty good thing right there. The fact that he knows all about Cato, and like he was coached by the guy. So like, I think that could pay off big time for him eventually. I mean, I don't see any of those other guys really getting any playing time. I mean, I feel like most of them are going to be redshirted anyways. Assuming whatever the eligibility issue is, I think most of those guys, especially the newer, younger guys, will probably be redshirted because, I mean, you don't really need to have 4 or 5 active quarterbacks on the roster per se. I mean, it's definitely going to be Green and Thompson 1 and 2. I mean, I don't think everybody knows that, but anybody behind those guys, I mean, yeah, Grant Wells, that's a name a lot of West Virginia guys remember, and so I mean, there's some pretty good guys, young talent back there. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that Isaiah Green was in this same position, and now look at him. So one of these guys could end up being, like that in the future. I mean, assuming whether or not Green pans out, which it looks like he will. But yeah, I mean, they got some guys back there waiting in the wings. It could be, I mean, maybe not this season, but could be something to keep your eye out for in the coming years.
Yeah, you would like to think that Grant Wells and Underwood will both redshirt.
Yeah.
Jackson White and Luke Zaban have already redshirted, but still, there's no need to burn I mean, you get a blowout win or something like that with these new redshirt rules. You can stick Grant Wells in there or Underwood in there and give them a little bit of PT, some mop up duty or some garbage time to see, how they respond to live action game time. And then you can do that a few times throughout the year if the opportunity presents itself without, burning a red shirt. So we'll see how it all plays out. But yeah, man, it's 1 and 2. This is Isaiah Green's team. Year 2, we keep saying this about all these offensive groups for the Herd. Year 2 in this Tim Cramsey offense. So, things should be a lot more fluid for Isaiah Green and Alex Thompson. Very veteran offensive line. Very capable runners, and then, several capable receivers. And, we said that last week, who's going to be the guy that turns into the guy. But you got to feel good for, if you're a Herd fan about these quarterbacks. So let's talk about these. Well, I mean, I guess the biggest loss, this is really easy question. There's not a biggest loss because your top passers return. So who are you most excited to see in 2019?
Definitely Isaiah Green. I mean, no doubt about it. I can't wait to see him this year. I think he's going to make a really good jump. I mean, just think most quarterbacks, at least if you're truly good or great, most quarterbacks make a significant jump from year to year, or at least your freshman year to sophomore year. I mean, look at even guys from Marshall's done that. I mean, Cato's done that. Chad Pennington's done that. Byron Leftwich wasn't a freshman when he started, but he made a big jump from his first year starting to his second year. Big jump. So, that's kind of just the trend that needs to happen. And I think that will happen. I can't wait to see Green this year. Like you said, it's year 2 in Cramsey's offense. I expect the playbook to be opened up. I expect more, kind of trickery kind of things and, different formations and pre-snap stuff. And I think a lot of that stuff's going to really be a big factor for Green, especially leading the charge out there at quarterback. So I'm definitely most excited to see Green.
Yeah, I think you and the rest of Herd Nation as well. I hate to, I'm not trying to steal your thunder, terrible pun here, but sounds like your breakout player is also going to be Isaiah Green. So who's your breakout player for 2019?
You caught me. It's Isaiah Green again. Caught me again. Look, no, I could see him. Well, I might not get into this yet because I might say that for my hot take, but I could see him having some pretty big stats this year. And it would definitely be breakout quality stats and, just a breakout quality season. I mean, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, breakout might be a little bit of a stretch, but because he was a good, first year freshman starting quarterback, but I could just see it being much better this year.
Conference USA co-freshman of the year, almost 2,500 yards passing, no slouch of a season last year. And if he doesn't miss 3 games, who knows what those final stats end up like. But,
right.
Hey, would you talk about coming in and maybe chucking around for 4,000 yards or something like that? I would consider that a breakout season. So who's going to be your MVP for 2019?
Isaiah Green. I mean, it's pretty straightforward for Marshall this year for the quarterback stuff. So, I definitely think it's him. I was wondering when I was going to bring this. I kind of compared a couple of stats for him. I've noticed a lot of parallels being drawn from his freshman year to Rakeem Cato's freshman year, and I compared both of those stat lines, and they're eerily similar. Cato only had a 3.2% better completion percentage. Green threw for about 400 more yards. They had the exact same amount of touchdown passes, and Cato had 1 more interception than Green did. That's like really, really close. So, it's not like I'm going to predict it not like I assume that he's going to have the year that Cato had as a sophomore where he was like 37 touchdowns and whatever. But, he could get close to that. So, I just think he's going to have a great year. I think everybody around him is going to really help as well. The receiving unit, I think, ultimately will step up. He's got good running backs. He's got a great O-line. He's got a lot of options, and I think that's going to help out a young quarterback. So, definitely MVP, Isaiah Green.
If memory serves, Cato also missed some time as a freshman as well. So
he did.
It's not like these stats are so eerily similar and Cato played a full season and Isaiah Green didn't. They're eerily similar, and they both probably missed a similar amount of time. So It's pretty wild. Now I'm going to tell you this right now. After the sophomore season, if the stats are still eerily similar, that's going to be something kind of amazing. All right, it is hot take time, Trace. You've painted yourself into a corner. So let me hear what you got for your hot take for these Herd quarterbacks.
All right. Well, this is going to be an Isaiah Green stat line prediction. Average.
Boy.
Oh, yes. So I think that he's going to have 30 touchdown passes, which will be only the second 30-plus touchdown pass season that Marshall's had since Rakeem Cato. That'd be the first one since Cato. So I think he's going to have 30 touchdown passes. I think he's going to only throw 10 interceptions, and I think he's going to have 3,500 passing yards.
Okay. And that is a super solid season. You're talking about an extra 1,000 yards passing, doubling touchdowns from the season before, and remaining the same at interceptions. I would consider that one hell of a leap from year 1 to year 2.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty fair hot take. I think if that were to happen, Marshall would be sitting pretty record wise. So we'll see how that all irons out for you here in a couple of weeks when we do our season predictions. All right. Hang with us on the other side of this break. Yes, that's right. A special 2-break episode of the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. We're going to talk about some coaching staffs. We're going to get Moff back in here, and we're going to talk about this Western Kentucky staff. We'll give you a few stats, and we'll let him talk to you about his feelings on the staff and what maybe what Topper fans can expect this year. So hang with us. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast.
Shanley, quick throw, completes it into the end zone. Kyle Fortenberry, the tight end, has the Hilltopper touchdown.
Davis Shanley just getting the snap. He saw the open guy, Kyle Fortenberry. And the only thing that he did, he just ran a simple 6-yard stop route, turned around and inspected the ball.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. We're going to finish this thing out. We're going to talk about the coaching staffs, head coaches in particular. And we're going to start back in Bowling Green, Kentucky. We got Moff back joining the crew. Phil still ranks this is just coaches. I don't know if this is head coaches only or the coaching staff, but he ranks the Topper staff 14th. And of course, like everything else, it's the unknown. He's the first, Tyson Helton, the first season at Western Kentucky, first season as a head coach. So, there's really nowhere to stick him because you don't know what you got. But a little bit about Tyson Helton and how he got to be the head coach at Western Kentucky. Now, I did not write down every stop, but you'll get a good idea. Western Kentucky head coach Tyson Helton from Gainesville, Florida. I did not know that. First season, like I said, at Western Kentucky as the head coach, and the first season as a head coach. Played quarterback at Houston from 1996 to 1999. His coaching career began just the next season as he was a GA in Hawaii. Pretty good place to start things out in paradise. And, of course, we'll fast forward here about 15 years to where Western Kentucky fans will know him best, as he served as offensive coordinator from 2014 and 2015 under Jeff Brom. 2016 and 17 moved out to USC, Southern Cal. 2018 moved back to the East Coast, where he was offensive coordinator at Tennessee. And that brings us to 2019, where Tyson Helton is the Western Kentucky head coach. So, Steve, let's talk about Tyson Helton for a minute. I'm sure Topper fans are happy to have him back. I know you're probably happy to have him back. Thought he should have got the gig a couple of years ago, but wasn't the case. So 2 years delayed. Here's the guy you wanted a few years back. So let's talk Tyson Helton.
Yeah. I've got the receipts on Twitter. I wanted Helton to be the guy when Brom left, and we end up ultimately hiring Sanford. I wanted Ellis to come back and be his OC. And then lo and behold, we get our wish a few years later, under worse circumstances, however. But, he's a new coach. The ranking is fair. You don't know what you're going to get. He's going to give you that typical coach talk. What I do like is he's not quite as polished on the microphone as Sanford was. Sanford, kind of blew a lot of smoke and kind of was real rah-rah. We're going to play in a New Year's Six Bowl game. That's the goal. Helton's getting on the mic, and he's kind of just telling it like it is. The scrimmage before Fan Fest today, he could have bit his tongue. He could have sugar-coated things, but he was critical of the offensive play, the quarterback play. And, I like to hear that. We don't always want to see that coach speak. He just told it like it is. He's a first-time coach. We've kind of gotten used to that over the last 10 years, going from, Willie to Petrino to Brom to Sanford. And every single one of those new coaches, whether it was their first experience or not, there's growing pains, being the head guy in charge. So as much as I want to believe that it's going to be exciting and we're going to win a lot of games, and, I know that's his goal. Ultimately those growing pains can sometimes be hard to watch, and you might lose a couple games because of poor decisions. But I don't think it's going to be any worse than what we endured the last couple of years. So I think we're stepping in the right direction, whether that happens all in 1 year or not. I think Tyson's going to do a good job and lead us into the direction that we'd rather be heading. So I'm excited for Coach Helton to get some wins under his belt, hopefully in the near future.
Yeah, it really would have been nice to continue that momentum that the Toppers had going. Really, after the 0-12 season or whatever, whatever it was, the trajectory really started going upward. And, of course, it culminated in 2015-2016 with back-to-back conference championships under Jeff Brom and Helton there as the OC and yada, yada, yada. And we were both in agreement that we thought Helton was the guy to succeed Jeff Brom when he departed, and it just didn't happen. So it would have been nice to see that momentum, the continuity in the program continue. But, you ultimately get your wish. It's just 2 years removed from initially wanting it. And, now it's more of a rebuilding campaign than a carrying the torch campaign. But hey, you got to be happy. I mean, before you even take a snap on the field, there's excitement around the program that just wasn't there last year. People had kind of given up a little bit by the end of the season last year, and it's nice to have some of those same people excited again. If for nothing else, just to have fan excitement there. So let's talk a little bit about this staff. You mentioned offensive coordinator Brian Ellis, whom you wanted 2 years ago as well as the offensive coordinator. Most Topper fans should remember him from his previous stint on staff under Brom and with Helton. And, of course, Ellis coached that bowl game was calling plays in the bowl game against Memphis. I believe Nick Holt was the actual interim head coach, but Ellis was calling plays. And I thought that might have landed him a spot somewhere as an OC after that, but it ultimately didn't, I think. So I'm glad he made his way back to Bowling Green. Defensive coordinator, still Clayton White. I mean, what is this now, year 3 or year 3, okay. Running backs coach, Garrett Sachere. Wide receivers, Chris Chestnut. Tight ends, Zach Langford. O-line coach, Mike Goff. Linebackers, Mo Crum. Defensive ends, Jimmy Lindsay, also serves as recruiting coordinator. Defensive tackles coach, Kenny Martin. And safeties / special teams coach, Andy LaRussa. So what about who stands out to you the most? Coordinators aside, who stands out to you the most? Who are you glad that is still on staff? Who are you looking forward to? In particularly of these new hires? I mean, anybody that you've kind of liked what you're seeing? I mean, instead of giving me the blanket answer, like, yeah, I like everybody, there's got to be some of these coaches that have really stood out to you in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, with the staff that he put together, really excited that he kept pretty much everybody on the defensive side of the ball except for the special teams coach. Andy LaRussa is new to the coaching on the defensive side. So continuity on that side. Clayton White back, 3rd year. A lot of the players, it's their 3rd year in that system. So they're going to have a lot more freedom and experience with just the play calls on the field. Should see a continued step of progress and improvement on that side of the ball. And, everything we heard from the scrimmage earlier today was, the defensive side of the ball kind of dominated things. So, obviously, we'd like to see the offense be more explosive, but if we can lean on a solid defense, that's a good place to start. And then going down that list, of course, Brian Ellis, you mentioned him, excited to see what he can do. Really his stock was sky high when he coached that played or called the plays for the Memphis game, and we just absolutely throttled them. He really called a beautiful game. And then going down that list, Chris Chestnut with the wide receivers, looking forward to seeing him develop some guys. He's got a deep room, a lot of talent. And then Mike Goff with the offensive line. I mean, you're talking about a guy who has extensive NFL experience and playing time, is now coaching a lot of 3rd-year players on the offensive line. We've talked in depth about those guys and expecting improvement and a big jump and the production of our quarterbacks and running backs to just skyrocket. And then we've got a guy with NFL experience and NFL coaching. He's been coached by NFL coaches. So, kind of the best of the best at that position to coach our guys up. So, he's probably who I'm most excited to see because I really expect a lot of our offensive line. And then keeping Jimmy Lindsay around, who's just been a stud recruiter for us, just getting them Georgia boys, staying down in Florida, getting, shaking that tree and getting some Florida guys for us. So, I'm glad that side of the ball was kept together. And then, bringing Brian Ellis back and then that offensive line coach. I think we've got some good young coaches that are going to prove their worth and hopefully do a lot of good things this year, develop some players and win a lot of ball games before it's all said and done and they leave the hill.
Well, I got to say, I think this is a pretty solid staff as well. Keeping the defensive staff basically intact was a solid decision. If you're going to try to revamp the offense, and you have a pretty decent defense already from the year before, there's no need to try to revamp a defense as well. Keep some continuity there because like you said, you may be leaning heavily on those guys to start out the season and maybe ultimately throughout the season if the offense doesn't jive the way you want it to. But I think Hilton made some excellent hires on the offensive side as well. We'll see how that all plays out, but I think by and large the best hire was probably Brian Ellis at OC. And, I think you're also right. Keeping Jimmy Lindsay was a big-time move. Excellent job down in the South. As you mentioned, I mean, that's bread and butter for a lot of football teams. I mean, not that there's not a lot of talent in the Kentuckys and Tennessees and places that are really close to Bowling Green. There are, but there's just so much talent in quote unquote SEC country. Those, Georgia and Florida and the Carolinas and stuff. So it's a good move keeping Mr. Lindsey as well. So we'll see how it all plays out. Of course, the thing I failed to mention, which is pretty obvious since it's Tyson Helton's first year as a head coach, of course, 0-0 career record. I mentioned I will have to mention that when we talk about Doc Holliday here in a minute. All right. Now you're brought up to speed with this Topper coaching staff. Let's transition and switch gears. We're going to bring Trace back in. Now let's talk about these Marshall coaches. Of course, head man for the Herd, John Doc Holliday, entering his 10th season at Marshall. From Hurricane, West Virginia, best known as the hometown of one Moonshine Throwdown podcast co-host Trace Johnson.
Best city in the state.
So, hometown tie for Trace and Doc. How about that? Bet you guys didn't know that. Also, kind of been brought up, and you can't talk about Hurricane, West Virginia without saying that, yes, it's spelled like the weather formation, but it's pronounced hurricane, just like that's just one of those West Virginia things. If you come and say Hurricane, West Virginia, they're going to look at you sideways. So you might as well, if you're going to say it right? Right. Okay.
Right.
Like I said, Doc Holliday, 10th season, entering his 10th season at Marshall, a 70-46 record overall, which places Doc second all time on the wins list at Marshall. Bob Pruitt, of course, number one all time with 94 career victories. Doc 6-0 in bowl games. So a couple of things to hang his hat on. I mean, that all time wins record is kind of within reach. I mean, you need 25 wins to get there. You string together 3 more, 8+ win years, and you're the all time leader there at the Herd. Doc's playing career, linebacker at West Virginia University from 1976 to 1978. Coaching career began at WVU just a year later as a GA in 1979. Fast forward a bunch of years and a bunch of career stops later, and Doc lands at Marshall in 2010. And before accepting the head coaching position at Marshall, he had never been a head coach or a coordinator of any sort. Now, he had served as an associate head coach at several stops, was always a recruiting coordinator. Doc Holliday, widely known as one of the finer recruiters in the country. Really one of the first guys to make inroads in the South Florida area some 3 decades ago. So was on staff with Urban Meyer at UF when they won a couple of national titles, was at NC State and then West Virginia before coming to the Herd. So let's talk about Doc Holliday for a minute, Trace, and then we'll talk about this Herd staff.
Yeah, I mean, Doc's just right off the bat, he's a good coach. I mean, it's obvious he's a good coach. I mean, 70-46, that's a sustained success, basically, of winning year in and year out, and that's where Marshall has gotten to. I mean, yeah, he's had a couple dud years here and there, but early on is when 2 of his only 3 losing seasons, 2 of them were in his first 3 years. So that was when they were still trying to build the program and everything. And then 2016 was just a complete fluke or an anomaly. But yeah, I mean, look, I was just sitting here thinking about it. I feel like he's probably the longest tenured coach Marshall's had in, probably 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, I was just sitting there thinking about it. Most in the 70s were pretty short stints, 80s, 90s, Pruitt was there for, I think, 8 or 9 years. So, I mean, that's not as long. So, I mean, this is his 10th year. And I still remember vividly the day he was hired. Met him a few times, really nice guy, humble, down-to-earth guy. You like to have West Virginians coaching and representing West Virginia schools. I mean, colleges, that's cool. I mean, but the big knock, and I'll also say he's also, yes, you are right, definitely considered one of the better recruiters. He's a well-traveled guy. He's pretty much played or coached with about everybody that you can think of, big names in college football history, some of them at least. But the only big knock on Doc really is the fact that he only has one conference title. I mean, that's what all the fans are going to talk about until they win another. He's got one conference title, and it's his 10th year. So, I mean, yeah, you can understand early on having to build to a conference championship level, but then in 2014 when they won the conference title, the next few years you expected that level to remain. And in 2015, they still won 10 games, but I mean, they just weren't as good as Western Kentucky that year. And then 2016, they fell off just like nobody expected. And 17 and 18 were good years, but just not great years. So, I mean, you want to see that get back. I mean, fans are really starting to get restless with that. I mean, a large portion of the fan base is. So I feel like they're in need of another conference title. I mean, yeah, and he's 6-0 in bowls. I mean, good Lord, that's really impressive in its own right. So, I mean, he's a good coach, really good coach, really good guy to have represent your program. But there's a minority of the fan base that's going to be on him for only having one conference title. So that's kind of where, I mean, am I glad he's here? Yes, for sure. But at the same time, got to start winning more conference titles.
There would be a minority of any fan base if Nick Saban were the head coach at your school. Yeah. Like no matter what school it is, the greatest Bill Walsh could come back and reinvent offense in the game of football, and there would still be a small sect of a fan base that would be a hater. But it is what it is. There were some growing pains with Doc Holliday because, the game time decisions were questionable early in his career. I remember a lot of Herd fans talking about that, and that has gotten considerably better over the years. So, when you're learning on the fly and all of a sudden you got to be the guy that makes those decisions, those things are going to happen. But you're a decade in. I mean, 70 and 46, it's not bad when you break it down year by year. That's like 7.5 wins a year. I mean, that doesn't sound that tremendous, but when you talk about the number of 10-win seasons, and then you take into account some when the wheels just fell off, the 7.5 wins per year just is a little skewed. So let's talk about the rest of the staff. Offensive coordinator Tim Cramsey, two DCs, co-DCs, former head coach from Charlotte, Brad Lambert, and of course, assistant coach from last year, defensive line coach, J.C. Price. Those two guys serve as co-defensive coordinators for the Herd. Running backs coach Pepe Pearson, wide receivers Dallas Baker, tight ends coach Kyle Segler, offensive line coach Greg Adkins. Brad Lambert also serves as the linebackers coach, defensive end coach Cornell Brown, defensive tackles, like I mentioned, J.C. Price, cornerbacks Chip West, and safeties Mike Trier also serves as the recruiting coordinator. Now, if you'll notice, there is no special teams coordinator. We mentioned, I believe, that Doc likes to coach special teams himself in an earlier episode. I can't remember. Also, one thing, there's no set quarterbacks coach, but I'm pretty sure Tim Cramsey takes that in his role of responsibilities as well. So how about the staff here, Trace? Who are you happy to have retained? Who are you excited to see who may be a newcomer? I mean, who of these coaches, just like I asked Steve, who stands out to you? Who do you like? Who have you just taken a liking to on this staff?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there's a lot of coaches to like on this staff. And I think this is probably, within recent years, I would say this is probably one of the most continuity that they've had as a coaching staff head into a season, because it seems like they always lose coaches like here and there, they'll go to a bigger job or whatever. But kudos to Doc. He always manages to replace them with really good guys. But I mean, if you look at it, I mean, I'm really glad J.C. Price is back, because he's been a loyal guy for Marshall for years. He's been a really good guy on the staff. I like that. And then Brad Lambert, I mean, a lot of people are praising that move, and I think that's definitely going to be a good move. I mean, he's a well-traveled guy. Charlotte, even though they've pretty much been a dumpster fire, I mean, they always have a pretty solid defense. I mean, they were like, I don't remember. I saw something that said they were like third in the conference in some defensive category last year. So Lambert's been around. He knows what he's doing as far as that goes. And then year two, like we keep talking about, year two of Tim Cramsey, I expect a big change of pace for the offense. I expect it to start looking like it did from 2012 to 2014. I mean, not going to predict they're going to go out there and average 45 points a game, but I expect to start seeing more creativity they haven't seen in years. Honestly, everybody knows how non-creative, to be blunt, that Bill Legg was at most times. So I expect him to see more creativity and crazy stuff like that from Ramsey. And then Greg Adkins back as offensive lines coach. I expect good things from that unit, really good things from that unit. He had a good debut season for the Herd last year, so I expect more of the same this year, and then some because the O-line returned so much talent. But, I mean, yeah, there's just a lot of continuity with this coaching staff right now. I mean, you're always going to have a couple guys here and there switching around. Obviously Adam Fuller's gone now. He was really good last year. But, I mean, I like the staff. Doc, if there's one of the things that you can always count on with Doc is he's always going to have a good staff. I think that's just always been the case. Now, here and there's been some guys that fans didn't really like too much, and that's understandable. But as an overall staff, I don't think he's ever failed at Marshall. So, and I think more that's the same. He's going to have. I think this is a really good staff, and they're more than capable of leading this program and this team to where they want to go.
Well, it is worth noting that J.C. Price was a full-time position coach last year. Brad Lambert was at Charlotte. And you mentioned Adam Fuller, who was the DC last year, has moved on, and he's now the DC at Memphis. So you essentially have first-year defensive coordinators. Even though J.C. Price is tremendously familiar with the defense at Marshall, he's been there for a number of years, and he does a lot for that defensive side of the ball. Great recruiter, well-liked in the program. And you mentioned Greg Adkins, just like Mike Goff at Western Kentucky, also an offensive line coach that has NFL experience, that's coached at some bigger colleges. I mean, he's been in the game for a long time. Definitely made if you can say made progress, just kept the level of play high with this Herd offensive line last year in his inaugural season with the Herd. So yeah, there's a lot to be happy about. Herd fans should be happy with the coaching staff that has been assembled here. This looks like a good one. So, let's see how it all pans out for the Herd in 2019. But, you got to think you like the leadership and you got to like a lot of the players. So let's talk about some final thoughts as we wrap up our long series of position group breakdowns. And next week, as we get ready for week 1 games, we're going to have our season predictions and the preview of week 1 games. So let's take it out of here with some final thoughts. Steve, start us off, and we'll get the heck out of here.
Yeah, I mean, this week was, basically just a lot of unknown talk of, what's actually going to end up on the field, what we're going to see and what we're going to expect. We all expect to see improvement. And just talking about expectations, going into our next, podcast, nobody at Western wants to see 3 wins, 9 losses again. We want to be bowl eligible like we were for so many years before that. So a lot of hopes, a lot of high expectations, but, I don't think we're going to be disappointed and see stuff worse than we were last year. And like we've, just keep continuing to say, every day we're getting closer to game day. Really exciting, still some position battles being figured out. First scrimmage was today. So, figured out kind of things we need to continue to work on and iron out and execute better, if we're going to have a chance to compete and win some ball games. So excited for it, but there's still a lot of unknown in the air. So, cautiously optimistic, kind of how this year is going to unfold.
Well, I want to talk about a point that you mentioned about Tyson Helton before I let you off the hook here. And then you were talking about how he kind of gives it to you straightforward. And that is something that I thoroughly enjoy about a coach, that he's not afraid to say, hey, we look pretty bad right now. Mm-hmm. And, some folks will say, well, that's kind of coaching 101 for a first year guy. He's trying to lower expectations and this, that, and the other. I don't really think that's what it is. I think he respects the fan base enough to just feed him the truth. And, whether you read that he's trying to lower expectations so you're not disappointed if it doesn't get off to a fast start, that's your opinion. But I think it's just a matter of, like I said, respecting the fan base and wanting to be honest with his players and saying, hey, you guys got to step it up because, we're not going to sugarcoat crap. But yeah, I'd be happy with the staff you got in place. I'm happy with a lot of the talent that's on the roster. I'm wanting to talk about season predictions, but I'm going to hold off on that until, we do the episode. So I don't want to let my thoughts out too much on it, but got to feel good versus where you were in 2018 if you're a Topper fan. So Trace, how about some final thoughts?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about the quarterback situation. Did a little digging to kind of back up this point that I've kind of been thinking for the last few years. To me, and it's pretty obvious when you think about it, the quarterback play has to be at an elite level within Conference USA for Marshall to win a conference title. And if you go back and look at it, the stats back it up. The last time they won a conference title in 2014, Rakeem Cato was number 2 in Conference USA in passer efficiency rating. And in fact, in his last 3 years at Marshall, he was never lower than second. But after 2014, the passer efficiency ratings have gone to number 6, number 7, number 8, and number 7. That's not going to win a conference title. And even further back than that, every single year Marshall won the MAC title, and post 97, of course, every year they've won a conference title, they were number 1 in passer efficiency rating every year. So every single FBS conference title Marshall has won since they returned to the FBS in 97, they've not been lower than 2 in passer efficiency rating within the conference. I mean, it's got to be there. I mean, I'm not saying that Isaiah Green has to be number 1 per se in the conference, but number 6, number 7, number 8, that's not going to win you. That's not going to get you a conference title. It's just not, because Marshall's been a good enough, well-rounded team over the last couple years to where they could be considered a conference title contender, and the defenses have been playing really well, and they've had really good offensive weapons. It's just the quarterback play. And that's not just a quarterback play, but the quarterback play is one of the reasons, in my opinion, that they haven't quite reached the conference title level in the last few years since 2014. I mean, it's been good enough at times, but it's not been up to the elite level that it needs to be at. And I think that if they want to win one this year, that's going to have to change.
Well, look, if you're the guy that touches the ball every time, you better be good at doing something positive with the ball. I mean, that just goes without saying, but yeah, that's a pretty good stat. I would not have ever looked that up in my, journeys of research, but never being lower than second in the conference in a year in which you won a conference title is pretty big time. It's a pretty telling stat. But I'm going to piggyback off of what you just said and say a lot of the same things, really. It's 10th season for Doc Holliday at Marshall. It's time to win another title. I mean, point blank. You played for 2, you've won 1. It's time to play and win another. Yeah, you missed out on 1 because of a stroke of bad luck last year and yada, yada, yada. But if you go out and win every week, that's not something you have to worry about. You should never put it in the hands of somebody else, so back into a conference title game, so to speak. So, line up and compete and see where the chips fall. All right, let's get the heck out of here. Next week, we will do, like I said, season previews, and we will preview week 1 games. Toppers have Central Arkansas, and Marshall is hosting VMI. Ought to be 2 easy wins for our programs. So be sure to tune in next week and get the season predictions from Moff, get the season prediction from Trace, see how they think these guys are actually going to line out in 2019. We're going to put some real takes, let some people keep some receipts on you guys instead of you guys keeping the receipts. All right, so let's get out of here this week. Steve, take us out.
Go Tops.
Go Tops. Trace.
Go Herd.
All right, we'll see you next week. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Later.